Thanks for joining us.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
Welcome to the podcast. Tune in for this episode of our podcast. Today we are going to interview some of the greatest and most influential minds in our field. And now, please welcome your host.
Listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. Unfortunately, we live in an age where we have domestic violence, sexual abuse, and Jewish families could be the most religious. It's an issue which society at large is grappling with, and we in the Jewish community are grappling with as well. And we're going to be looking at Project Sarah, which is taking a stand against domestic violence and sexual abuse. Ozer Herzog joined us. He's the executive director of the Jewish Family Services of Passaic, New Jersey, and they operate Project Sarah. So welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us, Ozer.
Yeah, thank you, Zev, for hosting me.
Thank you. So I know that your organization does a lot of different projects, but one of the things that you focus on, of course, is through your Project Sarah, dealing with domestic violence and sexual abuse in New Jersey, where you are. How big of a problem is it today?
That's a great question. You know, essentially what you're asking about is the prevalence. How prevalent is domestic violence and sexual abuse? Certainly, there are a lot of efforts to really try to quantify what that looks like. There are many barriers that prevent people from coming forward or from speaking out even when they're doing surveys. Happened to be that 20 years ago, when I was a grad student, I did research on this topic. And what I found was very interesting is that the percentages are much higher than people realize in the Orthodox Jewish community. Many people are puzzled or surprised to hear that there are high incidences of various mental health issues and social woes. There are conceptions that maybe Orthodox Jews don't really have these problems. But in actuality, the studies are showing that people are people. It's also very fascinating to see what's going on in Israel as well. I mean, in Israel, it's the homeland of the Jewish people. And yet you're seeing incredible rates, high rates of various mental health issues. Now, there may be subtle differences in presentations. For example, schizophrenia versus substance abuse versus depression versus eating disorders. So you do see that certain populations have higher rates of certain presentations as opposed to others.
Should be touching on something very, very important, is that in addition to dealing with problems like sexual abuse and domestic violence, there's a lot of mental health issues that society as a large is only starting to pay much attention to. And the religious Jewish community, up until very recently, there was a problem dealing with these issues. They didn't like going to therapy. They're afraid of being seen in a therapist's office, for example. It would hurt shidduchim. So now we're overcoming that. In fact, I just saw an incredible story. I forgot the name of the rabbi. He accompanied a student of his to the therapist's office. He's sitting in the therapist's office, and a guy walks in that he recognizes. And the guy was very embarrassed to be seen in the therapist's office. So the Rebbe says, please don't tell anybody that you saw me here.
All right, that's right. That's a great story. We've definitely made great strides as a community. I would say not just within the Orthodox Jewish world, but in all cultures and communities, there often has been stigma around mental health. So I think we've made great strides, but there's certainly tremendous room to grow. I happened to have a conversation with Rabbi Willig, Mordechai Willig. I was very fortunate to speak to him about this issue. And we were talking about, despite these advances, issues are often swept under the rug. And that's certainly one of the missions of Project Sarah, is to make sure that this doesn't get swept under the rug, that people understand that domestic violence and sexual abuse are real issues that happen, and that there are organizations like ours who are skilled and experienced in helping people through it. And we also do provide a lot of prevention education, because there's a tremendous amount that can be done to prevent it. As the British expression goes, right, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we really also just want to head it off before it happens, ideally.
But because of today's times, it's easier to discuss it. When I began broadcasting 43 years ago, I did a show about with Soviet support of Orthodox victims of rape and incest, and they were ready to tie me for how dare you discuss this. And I said the next day after the broadcast, 35 women called for help and put in the shelter. I said, if I help one person, I did my job. Today, it's much easier to talk about it. But does that mean that there are less cases because it's more open? Or do we find that there's still so many more cases, despite the fact that we in the community are able to grapple and talk about it and deal with it?
Yeah, again, it's very difficult to quantify, more or less. There are significant numbers. Stressors abound, whether it's financial stressors from increased population. Orthodox Jewish families are known for having many children. Is that a factor? Is post-COVID still a factor? There are many reasons for this manifestation, but the reality is these are things that we have to deal with. Speaking about the Orthodox Jewish people and looking at the Bible, there's a phrase that many people know about called the light unto the nations. And so when I wrote my dissertation 20 years ago, I really wanted to understand, if we're a light unto the nations, does that mean that we don't have such issues? And as I mentioned, the studies are showing that no, that even in Orthodox Jewish religious circles, these issues exist and in significant numbers. So then what does it mean for us to be a light unto the nations? And my theory is, and what I've been trying to do for the last 15 or so years as a professional, is to show that perhaps it's not that we don't have the issues, but how we handle these issues, how we address these issues, right? That might we try to set a good example. And so to that, I have met with many rabbis who are often on the front lines hearing about these particular issues and who are very involved in their communities, trying to also partner with us to address these issues.
Well, that's been a change, because there was a period of time where if you knew somebody was a molester, there was a reluctance to go to the police and let them know. That's changed drastically, but there was a whole debate about that years ago about who you should tell your rabbi, but the rabbi is not equipped necessarily to deal with this issue. You can deal with it, but some other people may not be. So it's nice to see that there's an openness to discussing that. But how do you prevent it? You mentioned earlier that an ounce of prevention is certainly something worthwhile to consider. How do you prevent, whether it's abuse or sexual abuse? Give us some pointers that you're working with at Project Sarah.
Sure. So we have done a tremendous amount of work in camps, schools, and synagogues, educating directors and counselors and youth group leaders on good policies and safety training. There was an article that was published in December of 2023, just 1 year ago, in the APA, the American Psychological Association, a very renowned journal, that spoke about sexual abuse in the Orthodox Jewish community. And what it found is that when girls are abused, it's typically in the home by a relative, such as a father, stepfather, brother, or stepbrother. And when boys are abused, it's often outside of the home where there's lack of supervision. So what we found anecdotally, that's often in large synagogues, where there are places that people can run and hide, and also in camps. High numbers of abuse coming out of camps and sleepaway camps, because there's a lot of big spaces, open areas, or various places, and unsupervised time. And so that's where a lot of perpetrators have been able to find people.
So how do you deal with that? Because the camps are open and you have lots of open spaces, and somebody can go for a walk with a child.
Right.
How do you prevent it?
Sure. So we have done an incredible amount of trainings with camps to focus on safety policies and procedures. So many camps now have procedures in place, and those who take it very seriously will also tell their counselors that if you violate any of these procedures, it is a fireable offense, even if nothing happens.
Our guest is Ozer Herzog. He is the CEO, the director of Jewish Family Services of Passaic, New Jersey. But one of their divisions is Project Sarah, dealing with sexual abuse and also marital abuse and violence in the homes. Cameras are all around today. Do cameras make a difference in dealing with these issues?
As far as
And
if
what's in
there's
camps or these other areas, is that helpful in trying to stop the situation where people are alone? What are some of the guidelines? And also, how much do we teach the kids that if somebody does something inappropriate, they should tell somebody, and who should they tell?
Sure. I mean, I can speak more to the second question. The first question, I would defer that to, various camps and institutions that have experience setting up those cameras, and the policies that they've created, with those measures in place. But certainly, there's a lot of books now and presentations to parents about educating their children about healthy relationships and about speaking up if something doesn't feel right, if something doesn't seem right.
So that's why I know Rabbi Horowitz had published a book which was
Sure.
dealing with, for kids. And, there are other efforts that are being made to teach. But I think the more we educate our children and parents what to look for, if you see certain signs, I'm sure you deal with that. If you see certain signs of your children behaving in a certain way, it means that you should be suspecting that maybe something untoward is happening with your child.
Exactly. And a lot of it is really about creating a relationship with your child where they feel comfortable to come forward and to speak up. That's almost the bedrock of prevention, is having a good relationship where children feel that they can speak, that they can talk to their parents, that if they need to come forward with something, that they feel it's safe to do so.
Talking about holidays. Holidays are a time where families get together and you can have distant relations that come in. I think it's also a time of stress, which could lead to domestic violence, but also maybe cases where there could be sexual violence against children and others.
Absolutely. In fact, I was just speaking with Rabbi Lopiansky about this very issue, that many times there have been incidences where there's a relative in the home who's very friendly. Let's just take, for example, there's an uncle and there's a young girl in the home too. And, not to say that, there's inherently wrong with that kind of relationship, but it's certainly something to be mindful of as you're going into holidays. For example, let's say, guests are not allowed upstairs in the bedrooms, for example. That may be a family. So families will sometimes have their own, what they call, policies, or, what the rules are in the home about, what's, appropriate, and that sort of thing.
It used to be years ago that if somebody said they were abused, they weren't necessarily believed as, oh, it's a holy person, it's a rabbi, it's a uncle or a beloved individual. I think today we more readily accept when somebody says they've been abused, but it could also be abused as well.
That's right. Sometimes the accuser has a certain power, although that's very tricky, Zev, because we really do want people to feel that they can come forward and to speak up and to get help. At the same time, though, that's one of the of the oldest barriers, if you will, is that they may be accused of making stuff up in order to get some sort of other for some sort of ulterior motive.
Because you also have a situation where divorce, lots of times the abuse issue is tossed about to try to get advantage in divorce. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually the case. So lots of times, yes, we have to be careful. But in these cases, it's used to put leverage on, most cases, the husband, whether to give a get or make other financial compensation in the case of a divorce. So I don't know if you're dealing with some of those issues as well.
Yeah, sure. Those can be very challenging. At Project Sarah, we do thorough assessment. We really want to, and assessment is really ongoing as well. It's not like we have a one-time interview and then we have all the facts and then go forward from there. That assessment is ongoing. A main service that we're providing is really therapy, is treatment. So irrespective of who's at fault necessarily, or who's the victim, who's the perpetrator, you have somebody in your office who's asking for assistance, who needs, whether it's case management, therapy services, etc. So we are really interested in helping that person out. What happens in the courtroom may be something else.
So you're dealing more with the therapeutic aspect, trying to help heal them and dealing and coping with the situation, and try to also do preventive medicine to try to make sure that there's ways that it shouldn't happen or give them enough space to do so. How many people utilize your services during the course of a year?
Sure. So last year alone, we worked with over 130 individuals. So it's 130, statewide. And for prevention education programs, we did 193 presentations for over 3,000 people.
Wow. Who funds you?
So a lot of our funding comes from the state, but we also need donor dollars as well. In fact, Zev, we happen to be running a cause match campaign. So it's causematch.com/Project Sarah, where we need to raise $200,000. $200,000 is what's going to help us both continue our operations as well as expand. Right now, Zev, we have over 30 people on our wait list. 30 people who are waiting for help to address whether it's domestic violence or sexual abuse. We are just slammed. And, thank you for giving us this opportunity just to speak about what we're doing. And if any of your listeners, feel motivated to come to our the website, causematch.com/Project Sarah, and to contribute whatever they can. And in many ways, that we're not looking for big, donors. Of course, that would help tremendously, but it's also a show of support. The more people who could donate even a nominal amount would, really speaks volumes and connects to the theme of our campaign, which is take a stand. And that these are issues that we need the whole community to rally behind, to take a stand against domestic violence and sexual abuse. Yes, Zev, as you're saying, we have made tremendous strides, but we are far from where we need to be.
I'm curious to know, COVID certainly was a life changer. Did that affect that you had more people coming after COVID saying that they've been abused, whether it was sexually or domestic violence, which we still see ramifications today?
Yeah. So I think we're seeing a lot of articles now coming out in journals with data that is showing that COVID was really damaging for many people on many different levels. Certainly, we saw just a spike in various mental health issues, from depression, anxiety, to suicide, to domestic violence and sexual abuse.
I mean, we'll do another show about it, but depression seems to be a growing problem in our community and society in general.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why it is, or maybe people are more open to talk about it, but it seems to be a major issue that we have to grapple with.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big topic. I'm glad you're doing a show on it.
No, I think it's important because a lot of people are suffering from it, and it affects all kinds of ways in their life and their children and the family life, and it's been neglected. And I think people are more open to talk about it today. But it's something which I think is, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's certainly a lot more prevalent in today's society.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a lot more of it, and people are also, I think, more aware of it. So there are people are coming forward, and hopefully they're getting treatment.
I was give out the information one more time for people to learn more about Project Sarah.
Sure. So our website is projectsarah.org, and the campaign is causematch.com/Project Sarah.
If they go to Project Sarah, they can still find the information for the donations, correct?
Absolutely.
That's easier. People remember Project Sarah. So just remember projectsarah.org, get all the information. Ozer Herzog, the executive director of not only Project Sarah, but also the Jewish Family Services of Passaic, which runs Project Sarah and other divisions as well. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Zev. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You did a great job.
Oh, yeah? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So terrific.